"Fourscore and 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal."
Throughout United States history, the notion of unity has been tested several times, but always the sentiments of the Founding Fathers resounded in the hearts and minds of its citizens. Not even those sentiments that once healed problems could hold this nation together in 1861. The schism of the United States brought upon not only mass bloodshed, but also tested the true values of the country's foundation. It tested whether we the people could preserve and establish a union, or fall and perish. This all would be tested, and one remarkable man would rise to the occasion, fight for the Union, and deliver the greatest compromise man has ever witnessed in just a mere 2 minutes and 38 seconds. The greatest flaw of the Declaration of Independence, not eradicating slavery, planted the seeds of secession and the separation of the Union. The issue of slavery led to more than just a struggle of principles or beliefs. It transcended into a political issue on state sovereignty. This power struggle between the states and federal government would propel this nation to an end, or more importantly, a new beginning. Starting with the Missouri Compromise and the argument over admitting the state as a slave or non-slave state, the conflict of sovereignty and issues on slavery intensified. The nullification crisis of 1828 only escalated the conflict that had already existed. The rivalry between the North and the South were at an all-time high, with South Carolina proposing the doctrine of nullification. In Calhoun's words, a state has the right to nullify or reject a federal law that it considered unconstitutional. Now, if states were allowed to deem laws unconstitutional or leave the Union because they did not agree with the laws, then the principles our country was founded upon would diminish, and this most assuredly would lead to the demise of the Union. The debates, which ultimately led to a compromise, reminded people on both sides that the regional bickering was chipping away at the foundation of the Union.
I wish to speak today not as a Massachusetts man, nor as a Northern man, but as an American. I speak today for the preservation of the Union. Hear me for my cause.
Webster's cause was not heard, and the split between the North and the South grew, and by the time Lincoln ran and won the presidential election of 1860, the conflict of war was already on the horizon. Lincoln took the oath of office with a huge task at hand, preserving the Union. So in order to do so, he created a cabinet with the best minds, such as William Seward. Unfortunately, the election only further advanced the inevitable fate of secession by the southern states. South Carolina led the way by leaving the Union on December 20th, 1860. On April 12th, 1861, the Confederates fired the first gunshot in the soon-to-be long war at Fort Sumter. No one was killed, but the South's attack was the beginning of the conflict. On paper, the North seemed to have many advantages. Lincoln felt that a Northern victory was inevitable, but he underestimated the one crucial strength of the South's warfare: great military minds and the spirit to win. Robert E. Lee, a native Virginian who opposed the secession of his home state, rejected President Lincoln's offer to command the Union forces because he would always be a Virginian. His decline of this position would give the Confederate state a fighting chance in the Civil War. While the Union Army had numerous assets at their benefit, they were not well trained, and Commander George McClellan seemed to be half-heartedly fighting the Confederates. Lincoln knew something, anything had to be done. In 1862, radical Republicans and abolitionists Frederick Douglass pressed Lincoln to make the war into a fight between slavery and freedom. Lincoln decided to issue a proclamation of emancipation, which he presented to his cabinet. Only Postmaster General Montgomery Blair disagreed with Lincoln's idea. Worried about the fallout of the proclamation, William Seward, Lincoln's Secretary of State, advised him to postpone the release of the proclamation. Otherwise, the world might view it as a last measure of an exhausted government, a cry for help, our last shriek on the retreat. Taking his friend's advice, Lincoln put off the release of this document until a large military victory on the ensuing conflict. This document would transform the war into a good versus evil. Lincoln would not accept a defeat for slave freedom. He would not be known as the president in which the Union crumbled under. In 1862, the Army of the Potomac defeated the Army of Northern Virginia in the Battle of Antietam. Though not as decisive a victory as Lincoln would have preferred, it was time to release the Emancipation Proclamation. The document proclaimed that unless the Confederate States returned to the Union by January 1st, 1863, their slaves shall be thenceforward and forever free. While many rejoiced at the announcement of their proclamation, the New York Tribune exclaimed, "It is the beginning of the end of the rebellion, the beginning of the new life of the nation." However, it did not bring about the ideological compromise Lincoln had hoped for, because many Northerners still viewed slaves living among them as threats. A nation in pieces could not afford to be broken down any further. Something, anything had to be accomplished. That would be the compromise of all compromises. In 1863, Lincoln turned to a new plan, knowing that he needed to remind both citizens and troops that they were on the same side, the American side. The speech would need to be unyielding, poignant, and bring about a compromise of obstinate values. Not wanting either side to think their sons died in vain, Lincoln's speech would have to create a common ground.
I think that it was an address that not only was intended to explain what this war was about and what the stakes were in this war for the United States, but also to look to the future, confident that the United States would long endure, as he said at Gettysburg, rather than perish from the earth.
Now, would the Union be able to last and stand in eternity? The men fighting in the Civil War were doing this so that their children, their posterity, would be able to pursue their own happiness. In July 1863, the bloodiest battle of this gory, now 2-year struggle in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, resulted in a Union victory. For the first time in the war, Lee had abandoned his former philosophy and ventured up to the far north. All in all, the two armies lost more than 57,000 men. This 3-day battle was the costliest of the Civil War. There was to be a memorial ceremony at the battlegrounds of Gettysburg to commemorate the lives lost. On November 19, 1863, Lincoln would speak the words he had been crafting for months. These words would unify our nation as one, which in Lincoln's mind had never been broken. Contrary to a belief that some historians hold today, Lincoln did not write his speech on his train ride to Gettysburg. He merely polished it. It is impossible that a document created to sum up what our nation was about, and would be for centuries to come, could be written in just hours. As Lincoln took his place at the podium, the crowd was unearthly silent. Lincoln spoke his words eloquently and masterfully, but by most accounts, these words did not lift the Union cause. There was little reception to Lincoln's words on the battlefield at Gettysburg, and even Lincoln first admitted the words he once thought terrific were an utter failure.
He said to his close friend Ward Lamon that the speech was a disappointment, that it won't scour, as he put it.
The London Times said of the speech, "The ceremony was rendered ludicrous by some of the sallies of that poor President Lincoln. Anything more dull and commonplace it would not be easy to produce." Few recognized the importance and meaning of Lincoln's words. Weeks after Lincoln gave the Gettysburg Address, it started to garner respect. Lincoln spoke in such a way that it did not make the Confederates feel like rebels. It mended a broken nation.
Well, certainly the words of the Gettysburg Address are important, I think, in the process of reincorporating the defeated Confederate States back into the Union.
During the difficult period of reconciliation and reconstruction in the South, these words reminded the former Confederates that at heart they were always Americans, that they were always part of the Union and were welcomed back with open arms. The preservation of the Union, the continuation of these United States, that was the true victory and compromise of the American Civil War. It would take years before the United States was once again unified and stable, but without Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, it would have never happened in both hearts and minds. What started as a dedication was a reminder of what the nation had been founded upon. Lincoln's speech brought about the ultimate compromise. No longer was the nation a single-minded I, but now and forever were, we the people, these United States.
And that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth.